Two poor twin sisters follow a young billionaire after he leaves his wallet behind on a bench in the town square. When they return it, he is shocked to learn why they are out so early in the morning. The main square woke under a grey sky. Vendors were setting up their stalls while the first passers-by crossed the open area, bundled in heavy coats against the early morning chill. Lara and Liana, 10-year-old twins, spread out a colourful cloth on the ground near the central fountain. With synchronized movements, they arranged several rows of homemade sweets on it, chocolate bonbons, caramels wrapped in coloured paper, cookies, and lemon meringues. "Do you think we'll sell everything today?" Liana asked, organizing the last row. "I hope so," Lara replied. "We need to help pay the rent." The two exchanged looks filled with a sense of responsibility that didn't match their age. Even so young, they knew things at home had been tough since their mother, Sophie, lost her primary job. Their first customers soon appeared, local regulars and some tourists. The twins worked with the efficiency of little experienced merchants. Liana, more outgoing, would approach potential customers with practiced smiles, while Lara handled the money and kept things orderly. "Good morning, the best homemade sweets in town," Liana announced whenever a group drew near. As the morning wore on, the square came to life. Among the growing crowd, a tall, well-dressed man caught the twins' attention. He carried himself like someone important, absorbed in a phone call. "Think he'd buy some sweets," Liana whispered. "He looks too busy," Lara replied. The man passed by them without a glance and sat on a nearby bench, still talking on the phone. "I can't accept anything less than the agreed amount," he was saying firmly. "Harrington Enterprises doesn't do business that way." A few minutes later, the man ended his call, checked his watch, and got up in a hurry. As he did, something fell from his inside pocket, a brown leather wallet. Completely unaware of his loss, he strode away. "Lara! His wallet!" Liana hissed urgently. They looked at the wallet, then at the man moving off. Liana rushed to the bench, grabbed the wallet, and hurried back to her sister. "Let's see what's inside," she suggested, her eyes shining with curiosity. With hesitant fingers, she opened it. There were high-value bills, more money than they were used to seeing all at once, various credit cards, and documents bearing the name Thomas Harrington in elegant print. "We could pay our entire rent with this," Liana murmured, "and still have enough left for food." Lara looked at the wallet, then at the sweets they had spent the morning selling, earning only a fraction of that amount. She remembered their mother, who now worked 2 different jobs to support the family, coming home exhausted every night. "He wouldn't even miss it," Liana insisted. "Did you see how he dresses? He's rich." Lara was silent for a moment, thinking, "What does Mom always say about things that aren't ours?" she finally asked. Liana sighed. It was true. Sophie always insisted honesty was the one asset no one could ever take from them, even when they didn't have much else. "All right," she relented. "We'll give it back." "He's probably far away by now," Lara noted, looking in the direction where the man had disappeared. "Not if we run," Liana answered, already standing up. After asking the florist at the next stall to watch their sweets, the twins ran along the path the man had taken, Lara firmly holding the leather wallet. "There." "Dark coat," Liana exclaimed, pointing. They ran as fast as they could, weaving between people, jumping over puddles. Their identical brown ponytails bounced in unison. "Sir! Mister! Wait!" they shouted, but their childish voices got lost in the noise of the square. Finally, near the east gate, they caught up to him. "Mister in the dark coat." "Your wallet," Lara called, louder this time. The man stopped and turned, confused. The girls halted in front of him, breathing hard. "Your wallet," Lara said, holding it out. "It fell out of your pocket back at the bench." He patted his coat automatically, his expression shifting from alarm to relief. He took the wallet, opened it, and quickly checked the contents. "It's all here," he commented, sounding genuinely surprised. "Absolutely everything." His gaze studied the twins with new interest. "It's not ours," Lara said simply. The man smiled, a smile that seemed a bit unused, as if he'd forgotten how to do it properly. "Thank you for your honesty," he said, extending his hand formally. "My name is Thomas Harrington. I'm Lara Miller, and I'm Liana Miller. Twins, obviously," Thomas remarked. "Identical," they confirmed in unison. Thomas regarded them carefully. "A lot of people would have just kept the wallet, you know that, right?" Liana briefly looked away, but Lara held her gaze steady. "Mom always says we should treat others how we'd like them to treat us." "Your mother's wise," Thomas noted. His eyes caught something beyond the girls. "Those sweets over there, are they yours?" "Yes," Liana answered, growing enthusiastic again. "We sell homemade sweets, our mom makes them." "We need to get back," Lara reminded her. "May I come with you?" Thomas asked. "I'd like to buy some sweets to thank you." Back at their little improvised stand, Thomas observed the meticulous arrangement of treats. "Impressive," he commented. "How old are you two?" 10, they answered together. "And you're already experienced sellers." "We've been doing it for 2 years, Lara explained. "Since things got harder." Thomas raised his eyes, intrigued. "Harder?" "Mom lost her job when the place she worked shut down," Lara said. "Now she works at 2 different places but makes less than before." "Last month, we almost couldn't pay the rent," Liana added. "What about your dad?" Thomas asked. "We don't have a dad," Liana answered quickly. "I mean, he left when we were babies." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "I'll take one of each," he declared, pointing to the sweets. As the girls wrapped up the treats, Thomas continued chatting, asking about school and their daily routines. "You're very responsible for your age," he observed. "We have to be," Lara replied. "Mom does what she can, but it's not easy for anyone." Something in those words seemed to affect Thomas deeply. He accepted the package of sweets and gave Lara an amount significantly higher than the listed price. "That's too much," Liana protested, staring wide-eyed at the money. "It's a reward for saving my wallet," Thomas insisted. "Besides, I'm sure the sweets are worth every cent." The girls accepted, still a bit hesitant. "What's your mother's name?" Thomas asked. "Sophie," they answered together. "Sophie Miller." Thomas stood still for a moment, a strange expression crossing his face, somewhere between shock and recognition. "Sophie Miller," he repeated, almost in a whisper. "You know our mom?" Liana asked suspiciously. Thomas seemed to snap out of a trance. "The name sounds familiar." He checked his watch and frowned. "I have a meeting in half an hour." Taking out his phone, he stepped away a few paces. The girls watched him during the brief call, noticing his gestures as he spoke. "Problem solved," he announced upon his return. "I cancelled my morning appointments." "Why?" Lara asked directly. "I'd really like to meet your mother, if you don't mind. Her name reminded me of someone I met a long time ago." The twins exchanged wary glances. "Why do you want to see our mum?" Liana insisted. Thomas chose his words carefully. "Her name is very familiar. And after hearing about your situation, I might be able to help in some way." "We don't need charity," Lara stated. "It's not charity," Thomas assured them. "If she's who I think she is, maybe we can rekindle an old friendship." After a brief, silent exchange of looks between the twins, Lara decided, "Fine, you can come with us. But if Mom feels uncomfortable, you leave, okay?" "Absolutely," Thomas promised. With everything packed up, they began walking through the city. Thomas followed the girls down cobblestone streets, noticing how they greeted familiar faces along the way. As they left the main square behind, the buildings became simpler, the streets less maintained. "We used to live in a better place," Lara noted. "But we had to move when Mom lost her better job. It's cheaper to rent here," Liana explained. They arrived at a brick building with narrow balconies and colorful curtains in the windows. The stairs creaked as they climbed to the second floor. In the dimly lit hallway, they stopped before a door painted light blue. "We're here," Lara announced, turning the key in the lock. Thomas took a deep breath, feeling his heart pound. The door opened, and the twins went in. "Mom!" Liana called happily. We sold almost everything, and we brought a visitor." Thomas stepped into the small apartment. A voice came from a door on the left. "A visitor? Who?" Then she appeared, drying her hands on a floral apron. Her eyes widened as they fell on him, and the color drained from her face. The towel she was holding dropped to the floor. "Thomas," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Hello, Sophie," he replied, feeling the weight of 12 years of silence between them. It's been a long time. The silence that fell over the small living room felt solid enough to cut. Sophie looked pale, as if she'd seen a ghost. In a way, that's exactly what Thomas was, a haunting from a past she'd buried long ago. Lara and Liana glanced from one to the other, confused by the sudden tension filling the room. "You two know each other?" Liana finally asked, breaking the silence. Sophie took a deep breath. "Yes. Girls, go to your room for a moment, please. I need to talk to Mr. Harrington." The twins exchanged reluctant looks but obeyed. When the bedroom door closed, Sophie turned back to Thomas. "What are you doing here?" she asked, crossing her arms protectively. "Your daughters helped me in the square," he answered. "When they mentioned your name, I had to see if it was really you." A harsh laugh escaped Sophie's lips. "After 12 years with no news, Sophie, 12 years at Thomas," she interrupted. "Not a word, not a call, not even an attempt to find out if I was alive or dead." She gestured to the worn sofa. "Sit down. If we're going to have this conversation, we might as well be comfortable." Thomas complied. Sophie took a seat in a faded armchair opposite him. "What happened after you left?" Thomas finally asked. Sophie looked toward the window for a moment, as though gathering courage. "What happened was that I found out what it truly means to start from scratch," she said. "The day after our fight, when I tried to withdraw money to pay rent for the small place I had with Julian, I found out all my accounts were blocked." Thomas frowned. "Blocked?" "Yes. The savings account Grandma opened for me, the monthly allowance, even the account where I deposited what I earned giving piano lessons, all frozen." "Dad said you withdrew everything before you left," Thomas commented. Sophie let out another dry laugh. "Of course he did. It fits his version of events, that I was the ungrateful daughter who took everything she could before running away." "I stayed with Julian for a few months," Sophie went on, her voice controlled. "Living off street performances, sleeping on a mattress on the floor of a moldy apartment. I was pregnant and nauseated all the time, but I still believed we had a future." Thomas's eyes widened. "You were already pregnant when you left home." 3 months, she said. "That's why the fight with Dad blew up. He said I'd ruined my life and disgraced the family. He told me I should," she swallowed hard, "take care of the problem." Thomas closed his eyes, recalling the terrible argument. He'd been in the office next door when he heard the shouting. He hadn't intervened. He hadn't defended his sister. "Julian stayed with me for another 2 months, Sophie continued. "Then one day I came back from a job interview at a local diner and found the apartment empty. He'd taken his things, his guitar, and the little money we had." "My God, Sophie," Thomas murmured, horrified. "Rock bottom came a month later, when I was evicted and had to sleep in a women's shelter. Pregnant with twins, alone, no money, no family." Each word felt like a stone falling on Thomas's shoulders. Back at the Harrington mansion, the official story was that Sophie had run off with her musician boyfriend, taken all her money, and chosen to cut ties. "How did you survive?" he asked in a voice barely above a whisper. "Her social worker helped me find a program for single mothers. I worked 3 different jobs during my pregnancy, right up until it became physically impossible. After the girls were born, other women helped me. We took turns caring for each other's babies so we could work." Thomas tried to picture his little sister, raised in luxury, taught by the best tutors, living under those conditions. "I made slow progress," Sophie continued, "from diner attendant to waitress, then kitchen assistant. I learned to make sweets and got a better job. Every penny left over I saved." She paused, her eyes meeting his. "Do you know what the hardest part was? Not hunger or exhaustion. It was knowing I had a family who could have helped but chose to turn their backs. Her words hit Thomas like a punch. He had convinced himself Sophie was fine, that she had made her choice and moved on. "I should have looked for you," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have questioned Dad's story." "Yes, you should," Sophie agreed. "But you were always the perfect son, weren't you? The heir who never challenged the patriarch." Thomas had no reply to that. It was true. He had walked the exact path their father had laid out for him. "I guess the girls don't know any of this," he remarked. "They know a simplified version, that their dad was a musician who left us, and that I lost contact with my family over old disagreements." Sophie sighed. "I never wanted them to grow up bitter." "They're extraordinary," Thomas said. "So honest, so responsible." A genuine smile lit Sophie's face. "They're my greatest pride. Every sacrifice was for them." "And now," Thomas asked, "I heard about your financial difficulties." Sophie's expression hardened. "We're fine. I have 2 jobs, and the sweets help supplement our income. I don't need your charity." "It's not charity, Sophie. It's the least I can do after all these years. I'm your brother." "A brother is someone who's there when you need them," she retorted. "Where were you when I slept in a shelter? When I spent nights wondering if I had enough food for my daughters?" Thomas lowered his head. "You're right. I failed you. But I'm here now, and I want to help, not out of charity, but because it's my responsibility." Sophie studied his face. "Why now, after all this time?" "It was just chance. If your daughters hadn't found my wallet today, we probably never would have met again," Thomas admitted. "But now that I've found you, I can't just turn away again." Sophie stood and walked to the window. "You know what hurt the most? Not losing material comforts, losing my family. Knowing that no one, not even you who grew up with me, thought I was worth finding." Thomas felt tears sting his eyes. "I thought I was respecting your choice. I believed you wanted distance. And it was easier to believe that, wasn't it? More convenient." "Yes," he admitted. "It was cowardly and selfish of me." From somewhere in the apartment, the girls' hushed voices could be heard. "How are our parents?" Sophie asked. "Dad is the same, controlling, inflexible. Mom never fully recovered from your departure. I know she misses you." Sophie closed her eyes. She didn't look for me either. "You know Dad." She'd never openly defy him. "And I'm the only one who had the courage to stand up to him, right? And look where it got me." Sophie turned. "I don't regret having my daughters. They're the best thing that ever happened to me, but I paid a high price." Thomas stepped closer. "Let me help now, Sophie. Not to ease my conscience, but because it's the right thing to do." Before Sophie could answer, a noise from the hallway interrupted. The twins appeared, looking guilty. "Is everything okay?" Sophie asked. "You both sounded really serious," Lara commented. "And you're not telling us what's going on," Liana added. Sophie and Thomas exchanged looks. There was so much to explain. "Girls," Sophie began, choosing her words carefully. "Thomas he's my brother. Your uncle." The twins' eyes widened. "Uncle?" Liana repeated in surprise. "Why didn't you ever mention him?" Lara asked. "It's complicated," Sophie replied. "We lost contact a long time ago." "Why?" Lara insisted. "Because I made a big mistake," Thomas interjected. "When your mom needed support the most, I wasn't there for her, and because of that, I lost years I could have spent getting to know you both." "Does that mean we have more family?" Liana asked. "Grandparents, too?" Another exchange of glances between the adults. "It's complicated," Sophie repeated. "You do have grandparents," Thomas confirmed, "but it's complicated." "Do they know about us?" Lara asked. Thomas hesitated. "No." "Why not?" "That's a conversation for another time," Sophie intervened. "For now, all you need to know is that Thomas is my brother, and we're seeing each other again after a long time." "Okay," Lara agreed. "But you'll tell us everything later." "I promise," Sophie assured her. "Can I come back tomorrow?" Thomas asked. "I'd like to get to know my nieces better." Before Sophie could answer, the twins exclaimed, "Yes, please, Mom." Sophie looked at her daughters, then at her brother. There were so many old wounds, but there was also the possibility of healing. "All right," she agreed finally, "and tomorrow?" Thomas smiled, relieved. "Thank you, Sophie, for this chance." As he said his goodbyes, Sophie watched with caution and hope. 12 years of distance wouldn't disappear with one conversation. Trust would have to be rebuilt step by step. But for the first time in a long while, there was a path ahead. Not just to survive, but to mend old wounds. Thomas stopped his car in front of the imposing wrought iron gate. The Harrington mansion rose at the end of the drive, exactly as he remembered. Grand, ostentatious and cold, with marble columns and perfectly manicured gardens. Growing up, there had been like living in a museum. You could admire everything but never truly touch it. He took a deep breath before pressing the intercom button. He had rehearsed what to say during the entire drive, but now, standing before the estate where he'd been raised, the words felt inadequate. "Harrington Residence," answered a male voice Thomas didn't recognize, probably a new employee. "Thomas Harrington to see Robert Harrington," he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. The gate opened with an electric buzz, and Thomas drove slowly up the long driveway lined with cypress trees. Each yard traveled took him back in time. There was the bench where Sophie used to read, the rose garden his mother cultivated herself, defying her husband's opinion that Harrington ladies do not get their hands dirty with gardening. When he parked in front of the main entrance, the door was already open. Wilson, the butler who had served the family for over 3 decades, awaited with the same impeccable posture as always. "Young Thomas," he greeted with a slight bow. Even after all these years, Wilson still treated him like the teenager who ran through the corridors. "Wilson," Thomas replied, shaking the old servant's hand lightly. "Is my father at home?" "In the office, sir. He's expecting you." Of course he was. Robert Harrington was rarely caught off guard. Thomas crossed the entrance hall, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. The walls displayed the same family portraits as always, generations of Harringtons with severe expressions, as if preemptively disapproving of anything their descendants might do. He noticed, with a pang, that photos of Sophie had been removed. He stopped before the heavy oak door of the office, the epicenter of power in the house, where his father made every important decision, both for the business and the family. How many times had he been summoned there for serious talks? How many times had he left feeling smaller than when he entered? He knocked twice. "Come in," commanded the deep, authoritative voice. Robert Harrington stood by the window, back turned, hands clasped behind him as he looked out over the garden. At 68, he still held the same upright posture and broad shoulders that had always made him an intimidating figure. His hair, now completely grey, was the only visible sign of aging. "Dad," Thomas greeted, closing the door behind him. Robert turned slowly. His face, lined with deep wrinkles around the eyes and mouth, showed no particular emotion upon seeing his son. "Thomas, Wilson said you seemed upset. Some problem with the Asian subsidiary?" "Typical. Business first. Always." "I'm not here to talk about the company," Thomas replied, standing firm. "I came to talk about Sophie." The change was subtle but noticeable, a slight tightening of his jaw, a barely perceptible narrowing of his eyes. Robert turned again to the window. "I have no daughter by that name." Thomas felt anger surge in him, a hot wave rising from his chest to his throat. "For God's sake, Dad. It's been 12 years. And does that change anything?" Robert asked, still not turning around. "She made her choice." "She was 16, Thomas exclaimed, taking a step closer. "Practically a child. Old enough to know actions have consequences," Robert replied, his voice dangerously calm. "Now, if you didn't come here to discuss business, I see no reason to prolong this conversation." Thomas inhaled deeply, trying to control his frustration. He knew direct confrontations never worked with his father. Robert Harrington was like a fortress. The stronger you attacked, the more impenetrable he became. I found Sophie yesterday, Thomas said, changing tactics. By chance. That finally elicited a reaction. Robert turned, a shadow of curiosity in his cold eyes. And? She has 2 daughters. Twins. 10 years old. A muscle twitched in Robert's face, but his expression remained impassive. I assume they're the daughters of that worthless musician who seduced my underage daughter. They're your granddaughters, Dad? Thomas insisted, and they don't even know we exist. Sophie never told them about the family. Robert walked slowly to his imposing mahogany desk and sat in the leather chair, as if positioning himself for an important negotiation. If you came here asking me to acknowledge the illegitimate offspring of a failure who seduced my minor daughter, you're wasting your time, he said icily. How is she? Living in poverty, I imagine. That's what she deserved when she made that choice. The contempt in his voice was so palpable Thomas could almost feel it. She's surviving, Thomas replied, refusing to feed his father's morbid curiosity with details of Sophie's hardships. But not thanks to us. Robert opened a drawer, pulled out a folder, and began flipping through it casually, as though the conversation no longer interested him. If that's all now, I have a video conference in 15 minutes. You froze all her accounts, Thomas accused, unable to contain his outrage. A 16-year-old girl, pregnant, with no money, no family support. Correction. A 16-year-old who disrespected my authority, disgraced our family name and refused to correct her mistake, Robert replied coolly. The money was mine to give or take. I merely kept my word. And Grandma's trust fund for her. That was also yours to take. A flicker of annoyance crossed Robert's face. Your grandmother was reckless to leave that money accessible before Sophie came of age. I simply safeguarded the resources until she was mature enough to use them. Mature enough? Thomas let out a bitter laugh. She was left destitute. She slept in shelters, and that musician you despise so much. He abandoned her pregnant and with no money, took what little they had and ran. For an instant so brief Thomas nearly missed it. Something like concern flickered across Robert's face, but it quickly returned to the same mask of indifference. As I said, she made her choice. Thomas ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. The girls are extraordinary, Dad. Smart, polite, hardworking. They deserve to know they have a family. They deserve to meet their grandparents. I have no granddaughters, Robert said flatly. My daughter died the day she walked out of this house. Thomas stared at his father, incredulous. The calculated coldness of the man still surprised him, even after all these years. What about Mom? Does she feel the same? Robert did not answer immediately, and Thomas realized he had touched a sensitive nerve. Helen Harrington had always been the kinder side of the family, though never strong enough to openly defy her husband. Your mother follows my lead in this family, as she always has, he finally replied. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to prepare for my meeting. It was a clear dismissal, but Thomas wasn't finished. I won't abandon them again, he declared firmly. Sophie and the girls are as much my family as you and Mom, and if you won't help them, I will. Robert raised his gaze from the folder, studying his son with a calculating look. Do whatever you please with your money, Thomas, as long as it doesn't interfere with family business or bring that situation into this house. That situation has a name, Thomas snapped. Sophie, and your granddaughters are named Lara and Liana. Robert shut the folder abruptly. This conversation is over. Thomas felt a wave of fury, something he rarely experienced. In all his 34 years, he had never truly defied his father. He had always been the obedient son, the perfect heir who followed the path laid out for him. Even when he disagreed, he swallowed his objections. But now it was different. This wasn't about him, it was about an injustice he could no longer ignore. No, it's not, he said, surprising even himself with the firmness in his voice. You have every right to cut Sophie out of your life, cruel as that may be. But you have no right to stop me from being those girls' uncle or being the brother Sophie deserves. Robert raised an eyebrow, clearly unaccustomed to being contradicted. "Careful, Thomas. Don't mistake my patience for weakness." "Is that a threat?" Thomas asked, almost wishing it were. It would be easier to cut ties if his father explicitly forced him to choose. "It's advice," Robert replied, "one you do well to heed." Thomas looked at his father for a long moment. This man he had admired and feared in equal measure now seemed smaller somehow, diminished by his pride and stubbornness. "Goodbye, Dad." He turned and walked to the door. As he reached the handle, his father's voice sounded again. "Has she asked you for money yet?" Thomas paused, but did not turn around. "No. In fact, she refused my help." Another moment of silence, indicating his father's surprise. "Smart," Robert finally muttered. "She was always the smarter of you two." Thomas left without replying, closing the door harder than he intended. He crossed the hall almost at a run, eager to escape that house and the weight it represented. On his way out, he nearly collided with his mother, who was coming from the living room. "Thomas, I didn't know you were coming today," Helen Harrington exclaimed, her light eyes brightening at the sight of her son. Thomas hesitated. His mother looked more fragile than he remembered, paler, smaller. Her hair, once as blonde as Sophie's, was now completely white, though impeccably styled. "It was a last-minute visit," he explained, trying to soften his expression. "I was talking with Dad." Helen glanced toward the office, immediately understanding. "About business, I imagine." It was his cue to lie, to follow the unspoken script of the Harrington family, where certain topics simply weren't mentioned. But Thomas was tired of that game. "About Sophie," he said plainly. Helen stiffened visibly, her eyes scanning the area as if afraid someone might overhear. She grabbed her son's arm and guided him to a quieter corner of the hall. "You saw her?" she asked in a low, urgent voice. Thomas nodded. "She has 2 daughters. Mom, 10-year-old twins." Helen's eyes instantly filled with tears. How is she?" "Surviving," Thomas replied, repeating what he'd told his father. "The girls are lovely. They look a lot like her." Helen pressed a hand to her lips, trying to control her emotion. "Does your father know you found her?" "I just told him. Don't worry. His reaction was exactly what you'd expect." A sad sigh escaped Helen's lips. "He'll never change, Thomas. He truly believes he did the right thing." "And you, Mom, do you believe that too?" Helen looked away. "What I believe doesn't matter. It wouldn't change anything." Thomas felt both pity and frustration. His mother had always been like this, resigned, accepting her subordinate role, never confronting or defying. "You could have looked for her," he said more gently. "You could have done it for me if you didn't want Dad to know." "You think I never considered it?" Helen's voice trembled. "But what help could I offer without your father finding out? And once he did, because he always does, Sophie would be dragged into another family conflict she didn't need." Thomas wanted to argue, but a part of him understood. Robert Harrington controlled everything in the family, from finances to personal relationships. Helen had as little autonomy as a child. "I'm going to help her," Thomas said. "I'm going to be there for her and my nieces, even if Dad doesn't approve." Helen nodded, a faint, sad smile on her lips. "You've always been a good boy, Thomas. A good brother. Sophie is lucky to have you back." "You could see her too," he suggested hopefully. "Meet your granddaughters." Helen's gaze drifted toward the office, and Thomas knew the answer before she spoke. "Your father would never allow it." "He doesn't need to know." Helen smiled sadly. "He always finds out, Thomas. Always." She kissed him on the cheek, a rare gesture of physical affection in the Harrington family, and pulled away quickly, as if afraid someone might see her showing emotion. "Tell her," she began, then hesitated. "No, don't tell her anything. It's better this way." Thomas watched his mother walk down the corridor, her small, controlled steps echoing on the marble floor. Another victim of Robert Harrington's empire, he thought bitterly. He drove back to the city with his mind in turmoil. The encounter with his father had been exactly what he expected and feared, frustrating, painful, and ultimately without resolution. Robert Harrington wasn't going to change. His pride and stubbornness were as fundamental to him as his DNA. As he stopped at a traffic light, Thomas made a decision. If his father wouldn't acknowledge his granddaughters, then he, Thomas, would do more than that. He would be the uncle they deserved, and the brother Sophie needed. He would help financially, yes, but he would also be present, a real part of their lives. The light turned green, and he drove forward with new resolve, heading straight to Sophie's apartment, eager to share his plans. Upon arrival, the twins greeted him with surprising enthusiasm, considering they barely knew him. Sophie, however, studied his face closely. "You saw him," she stated, not a question. Thomas nodded. "Girls, could you give us a minute?" Reluctant but obedient, the twins headed to their room. "How did it go?" Sophie asked once they were alone. "Exactly how you'd expect," Thomas said, sitting down on the worn couch. "He refuses to acknowledge you or the girls. Says his daughter died the day she left home." Sophie nodded as if she had expected nothing else. "And you hoped 12 years might have softened his stone heart." "Maybe part of me did," he admitted. "But it doesn't matter now. Sophie, I want to help you." Sophie crossed her arms, immediately on the defensive. "We've been through this." "Hear me out, please," Thomas persisted. "I can pay for a better apartment in a safer neighborhood. I can make sure the girls attend good schools, have everything they need. You wouldn't have to work 2 jobs and still worry about having enough money at the end of the month." "Charity," Sophie said, the word sounding accusatory. "No," Thomas said firmly. "Family. It's what siblings do for each other. It's what uncles do for nieces." Sophie shook her head. "No, Thomas. I won't accept your money. Not after all these years of managing on my own." "Is it pride?" "It's dignity," she corrected. "I built all this apartment, this life, these wonderful daughters, without the Harrington family. I'm not about to become dependent on that family now." Thomas realized he was making the same mistake as his father, trying to impose his will, assuming he knew what was best. Sophie didn't need saving. She'd been saving herself for 12 years. "I'm sorry," he said sincerely. "You're right. I have no right to show up after so long and try to take control." Sophie's gaze softened slightly. "I don't want your money, Thomas, but—" She hesitated. "If you really want to be part of our lives, there are other ways to help. The girls need a man they can trust, someone who shows them not all men run away when things get tough." Thomas felt a lump in his throat. She was offering something far more valuable than the chance to open his wallet. She was offering the chance to build a genuine relationship. "I'd like that very much," he said, his voice unsteady. Sophie nodded, a small smile appearing on her lips. "Then start there. Be their uncle. We'll figure out the rest in time." Thomas understood he had a lot to learn about being family, more than he'd ever imagined, and his little sister, whom he should have protected, had a lot to teach him. A light rain fell over the city, the kind that didn't quite justify an umbrella but was persistent enough to leave everything damp. Thomas stood by the window in Sophie's small apartment, watching the droplets slide down the glass while trying to find the right words. In the 2 weeks since confronting his father, he had become a constant presence in his sisters' and nieces' lives. Improvised dinners, Sunday outings, helping the girls with their homework, small gestures that began to mend the bond broken 12 years ago. But Thomas knew he needed to do more. "I thought you had a meeting this afternoon," Sophie said, entering the living room with 2 steaming cups of tea. Thomas turned, accepting the drink with a grateful smile. "I cancelled—" "You can't keep cancelling things because of us," she said, taking a seat on the couch. "Your father's company." "My company too," he corrected her, "and I can rearrange my schedule however I want." Sophie raised an eyebrow, but did not argue. After years of struggling alone, it was still strange to have someone genuinely concerned about her well-being. "Have the girls already left for school?" Yes, Liana was nervous about a science test. She spent all night reviewing those flashcards you made with her. She'll do well, Thomas assured her. She has an excellent memory for details. Sophie sipped her tea, studying her brother. There was something different about his demeanor today, a contained energy, like he was about to propose something important. You didn't come here just to ask about the science test, she finally said. What's on your mind? Thomas took a deep breath. Now or never. Remember when we talked about you not wanting to accept my money? He began carefully. Sophie immediately tensed. I thought we had settled that. We did, he said quickly. I'm not offering you money. I'm offering you an opportunity. He set his cup on the coffee table and took a folder out of his briefcase. I know you're tired of working for other people, he continued, of impossible hours, bosses who don't appreciate your talent. And I know how extraordinary your sweets are. The girls told me you once dreamed of having your own bakery. Sophie placed her cup down too, suddenly wary. It's just an old dream, Thomas. A fantasy. It doesn't have to be, he said, opening the folder to reveal photographs of a small commercial space. This location is available for rent on Maple Street. It's in a decent commercial area, but not as expensive as the center of town. It has a basic industrial kitchen, space for a few tables, and a display window. Sophie picked up the photos, studying them with eyes that couldn't hide a spark of interest. It's a good spot, she admitted, but even if I wanted to, I don't have the capital to open a business like this. Commercial rent, permits, equipment, ingredients, staff, we're talking about a big investment. I have it, Thomas said simply. Sophie returned the photos, her momentary enthusiasm replaced by distrust. We've already discussed this. I don't want charity. This isn't charity, Thomas insisted. It's an investment. I'll be a silent partner. You handle everything, make all the decisions, and take the lion's share of the profits. When the business is stable, you can buy out my share if you want. So, it's a disguised loan, Sophie observed, crossing her arms. Thomas sighed, frustrated. Why is it so hard for you to accept help? Because nothing comes without a price, she replied immediately. I learned that the hard way. An uncomfortable silence fell between them. Thomas knew he was touching old wounds, the broken trust, the sense of abandonment, the closed doors when she needed support the most. If I wanted to invest in a stranger's business idea, he said finally, nobody would call it charity. It would just be a smart investment in something with real potential. Sophie didn't answer right away. Her fingers traced the edge of her cup as her eyes stayed fixed on the photographs scattered on the table. Why are you doing this, Thomas? Really? Thomas hesitated, knowing he needed to be completely honest. Part of it is guilt, yes, for not being there when you needed me. Part of it is selfish. I want to be part of your life and the girls' lives. But mostly, he paused, choosing his words. I believe in you, Sophie. I always have. Remember that cooking contest you won at school when you were 13? I told you then you should have your own restaurant one day. A reluctant smile tugged at Sophie's lips. I remember. You were the only one who tasted all my disastrous attempts before the final recipe. And I survived to tell the tale, Thomas joked. Look, I'm not asking you to decide now. Just think about it. Go see the space. Imagine the possibilities. Sophie looked at the photos again, allowing herself to dream for a brief moment. A bakery of her own. How many times had she pictured that while making sweets late at night, exhausted after a full day working for others? I'll think about it, she agreed finally. Thomas smiled, aware he had won a small victory. Your own bakery. Liana's eyes sparkled with excitement as she helped her mother serve dinner that night. Like just yours. It's just an idea Thomas suggested, Sophie said, trying to manage expectations. Nothing's decided yet. But you'll at least go see it, right? Liana persisted. Please say you will. Sophie smiled at her daughter's enthusiasm. I promised your uncle I'd think it over. We could help after school, Lara offered, ever practical, and on weekends. We already know how to sell. Just need to learn how to use the cash register. You shouldn't worry about these things, Sophie said, setting the dishes on the table. Kids should focus on school and having fun. But we want to help, Liana protested. We always help. Sophie looked at her daughters, so young yet so ready to shoulder responsibilities. She had tried to protect them from hardships, but they had grown up watching her struggle. It was natural they'd want to participate. If, and it's a big if, I decide to go for this, you can help a little, Sophie conceded. But school always comes first. Understood? Yes, the twins exclaimed in unison. Their excitement was contagious, and Sophie found herself smiling as they dished up dinner. Perhaps, just perhaps, this idea wasn't as impossible as it first seemed. Maple Street was exactly as Thomas had described, commercial, but not overly busy, with a pleasant mix of small independent shops and a few offices. The space in question was nestled between a little bookstore and a craft shop, a location that felt just right for a bakery. Sophie stopped in front of the empty storefront, trying to picture her creations displayed there. Homemade chocolates, caramel candies, cookies, lemon meringues. For a moment, she let herself imagine a tasteful sign over the door, Sophie's Sweets, or maybe something more refined like Miller's Confectionery. What do you think? Thomas asked, who had offered to come along. It's perfect, Sophie admitted reluctantly. Better than I imagined. Thomas grinned, handing her the key. The realtor left this with me. Want to look inside? Sophie took the key, feeling its weight in her palm. It was just a key, but it symbolized so much. Possibility, change, a new beginning. The interior was even better than the photos. Though it needed a good cleaning and some renovations, the space had character. A worn wooden floor, exposed brick on one wall, and large windows that let in plenty of natural light. In the back, the small industrial kitchen had basic equipment, though some items clearly needed replacing. The electrical work was redone recently, Thomas noted, watching Sophie inspect every corner. And the ventilation system is new. Obviously, you'd need specialized bakery equipment. Sophie nodded, already envisioning where everything would go. A few cozy tables and chairs by the window, a display counter in the center to showcase the sweets, and her domain, the kitchen, in the back, where she could create without the limitations she faced working for others. It's a big step, she said, mostly to herself. Yes, Thomas agreed, but you won't be alone this time. Sophie turned to face him, still cautious. What if I fail? What if I can't make it work? Then we'll try something else, Thomas answered simply. The difference is now you have a support system. You have me. Sophie glanced around again, taking in every detail of the space. It was scary, yes, but also thrilling in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. All right, she decided. Let's do it. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Sophie, still juggling her 2 jobs, used every spare moment to plan the bakery. Thomas helped with the bureaucracy, permits, licenses, contracts, while the twins pitched in, drawing possible logos and sampling new recipes Sophie invented. This one is perfect, Liana declared, tasting a new variety of petit gâteau that melted in the center, releasing a strawberry cream. You say that about everything Mom makes, Lara teased, though she was also savoring her portion happily. Because everything she makes is perfect, Liana retorted. Sophie smiled, jotting down small adjustments to the recipe. Her daughter's enthusiasm was comforting, but it also added pressure. They believed in her so much, they had so much faith in her success. What if she let them down? Good news, Thomas announced, stepping into the apartment with a folder of documents. All the permits are approved. We can start renovations next week. That soon? Sophie sounded surprised. Thomas shrugged with a somewhat sheepish smile. Maybe I sped things up a bit. Sometimes the Harrington name still has its perks. Sophie wanted to protest but held back. She was learning to accept help, to realize not all offers came with hidden strings attached. Thank you, she said simply. "Have you picked a name yet?" Thomas asked, helping himself to one of the petits gâteaux. "We're deciding between Sweet Moments or Miller's Bakery," Lara answered. "I prefer Sugary Dreams," Liana chimed in, "but I got outvoted." Thomas sampled the dessert and widened his eyes in appreciation. "Whatever you call it, with treats like these, it'll be a success," Sophie smiled, but worry lingered in her eyes. As plans moved forward, her fear of failing grew. It wasn't just about money. It was about her pride, her hard-earned independence, and most importantly, the example she set for her daughters. "What do you mean it's no longer available?" Sophie's voice trembled slightly as she confronted the realtor the next morning. The woman looked genuinely apologetic. "I'm sorry, Ms. Miller. The owner received a cash offer for the property yesterday afternoon. They accepted it right away." "But we had a deal," Sophie protested. "We were signing the lease today." "Unfortunately, without a signed contract, the owner was free to accept other offers," the realtor explained. "I really am sorry for the inconvenience." Sophie felt as though the floor had dropped out from under her. She had allowed herself to hope these past weeks, to believe in something better. She had even quit one of her jobs to focus more on preparing for the bakery. "Who bought it?" she asked, struggling to stay composed. "I can't disclose that information," the realtor said. "Confidentiality, but I can show you other available properties if you like." Sophie shook her head, bitterness welling up inside her. It always happened this way, didn't it? The moment she began to hope, some door slammed shut in her face. She left the realtor's office in a daze, wandering aimlessly through the streets. She didn't want to go home and face the twins' disappointment. She didn't want to call Thomas and admit all their plans had fallen apart. Maybe it was a sign, she thought bitterly. Maybe she wasn't meant to have something better. Without realizing it, she found herself on Maple Street, stopping in front of what had, until that morning, represented her dream for the future. Now it was just another reminder of what might have been. "I thought I'd find you here." Sophie turned, surprised to see Thomas approaching, hands in his coat pockets, his expression serious. "How did you know?" "The realtor called me," he explained. "I figured you'd come." "It's over," Sophie said, staring again at the empty storefront. Another door closed. Thomas stood beside her in silence for a moment, both of them gazing at the small commercial space they'd visited so hopefully. "You know who bought it, don't you?" Sophie asked suddenly. "It was Dad." Thomas frowned. "Why do you think that?" "It's exactly the kind of thing he'd do," she said bitterly. "Wait until I'm hopeful, then crush those hopes. A reminder that I can't escape his influence." "It wasn't him," Thomas assured her. "I checked. A development company bought this one and 2 other properties on the block. They're planning some kind of renovation." Sophie still looked unconvinced but nodded. "Well, I guess that's that. Maybe it really was too good to be true." "Not necessarily," Thomas said. "Come with me." "It's smaller," Sophie noted, looking around the new space Thomas had brought her to. 3 blocks over on the same street. "Yes," Thomas agreed. "And a bit older. It needs more work, but the rent is cheaper and it's still in a decent location." The spot was indeed smaller, room for only a few tables instead of the 10 they'd originally planned. The kitchen was also more modest, and it was clear the wiring would need upgrading. Still, it had its own charm, with large arched windows and a tiny mezzanine that could be converted into extra seating. "I don't know, Thomas," Sophie hesitated. "It feels like a bad sign, going with a plan B." "Some of the best businesses started as plan B," he countered. "Sometimes great opportunities come disguised as setbacks." Sophie walked slowly around the space, trying to imagine her bakery here. It would be harder, require more work, more adaptations, but maybe it could still work. "I'm not sure I have the energy to start the planning all over," she admitted. "Maybe it's a sign I should give up. Or maybe it's a test to see how badly you really want this," Thomas said gently. Sophie didn't respond immediately. She walked over to the window, watching people pass by, each lost in their own worlds, their own struggles, their own dreams. "I can't give up," she said at last. "Not now. Not when the girls are so excited, so proud of me for trying." Thomas smiled, relieved. "So, we'll have to be creative with the layout," she decided, already thinking about the needed changes. "Focus more on takeout, less on in-store seating, and we'll definitely need to refurbish that kitchen. I have some reliable contacts for renovations," Thomas said. "They can start immediately." Sophie turned to look at him, suddenly suspicious. "You had this place in mind from the start, didn't you? That's why you stayed so calm when you heard the other one was sold." Thomas looked a bit embarrassed. "Let's say it's always good to have a plan B. But I swear I didn't know we'd need it so soon." For a moment, Sophie wasn't sure whether to be angry at her brother's presumption or grateful for his foresight. She chose gratitude. "Thank you," she said sincerely, "for not letting me quit." Thomas's smile lit up his face. "That's what older brothers are for, right?" That night, after the twins finally fell asleep, tired from hours of excitement over the new plan, Sophie sat on the small balcony of her apartment. The cold night air was refreshing, clearing her thoughts. The past few weeks had been an emotional roller coaster, from initial distrust to hope, excitement to disappointment, and now renewed resolve. It was terrifying, yes, but also strangely freeing. For the first time in many years, she wasn't entirely alone in facing obstacles. She had Thomas by her side, not as a savior but as a partner, someone who believed in her enough to invest not just money but also time and energy into her dream. The fear was still there, fear of failure, of letting people down, of losing what she'd painstakingly built. But now there was something stronger, hope. Hope she could create something of her own, something that could grow and flourish just like her daughters. Sophie looked up at the stars, allowing herself to believe, just for a moment, that she deserved this chance, deserved support, deserved happiness, that the past, with all its hurts and disappointments, could finally be left behind. Tomorrow, she would begin preparations to open her bakery. No matter how small the space or how many challenges lay ahead, it was a new start. And this time, she wouldn't have to face it alone. Dawn brought a golden light spilling through the newly cleaned windows of the little bakery. Sophie had been up since 4 in the morning, preparing the final batch of sweets for opening day. Her hands moved with practiced confidence, mixing, molding, decorating, a ballet of motions she could do with her eyes closed. "Mom, we've already set all the tables," Lara announced, stepping into the kitchen wearing a perfectly fitted apron. "What else do we need to do?" Sophie glanced around, mentally running through her checklist. After 3 intense months of renovations, planning, and prep, the day had arrived. Sweet Moments would open its doors in exactly 2 hours. "Are the menus on the tables?" she asked, adjusting the oven temperature. "Yes, and Liana's cleaning the display case for the 3rd time," Lara said, rolling her eyes affectionately. Sophie smiled. Her daughters had embraced the bakery project with an eagerness that both surprised and moved her. Despite their youth, they insisted on helping every step of the way, choosing paint colors, offering opinions on which sweets should make the initial menu, even helping with the final cleanup. "Where's your uncle?" Sophie asked, sliding a tray of lemon meringues into the oven. "On the phone, dealing with some issue about deliveries," Lara replied. "He seems worried." Sophie nodded, feeling a twinge of anxiety. Thomas had invested a significant amount of time and money into this venture. While he insisted it was just good business, she knew much more was at stake: their relationship, the chance to make up for lost years, the possibility of a fresh start for all. When she finished arranging her last batch, Sophie washed her hands and went to the bakery's front area. Though small, it had been transformed into something enchanting. Soft blue and cream walls, round wooden tables with lovingly restored chairs, a marble counter to display the sweets, every detail carefully chosen to create a welcoming atmosphere. "It's perfect," Thomas said, joining her after wrapping up his call. "You did it, Sophie." "We did it," she corrected. I'd never have gotten here on my own. Thomas smiled, but looked tense. Our dairy supplier just called. They can't deliver today as promised, something about their truck breaking down. We can buy from the local market, Sophie suggested. Not ideal for tomorrow's production, but it'll handle the emergency. Already arranged, Thomas said. I also called another supplier to cover us. It'll cost a bit more, but... Thank you, Sophie interrupted, lightly touching her brother's arm. These small gestures of affection were still new between them, but becoming more natural each day. Thomas checked his watch. 1 hour and 40 minutes until opening. Nervous. Sophie hesitated. Terrified might be more accurate. Everything will be fine, he assured her. Your sweets are exceptional. People will come. What if they don't? She asked, her insecurities surfacing. What if all this effort, all this investment? Then we adjust our strategy, Thomas answered calmly. That's how business works. Rarely does everything go perfectly at the start. Sophie took a deep breath, trying to absorb her brother's calm. Over the past few months, she'd been impressed by how he faced obstacles, without panic, without the constant fear of failure that haunted her. To him, problems were puzzles waiting to be solved. I'll check on the display case with Liana, she decided, needing to keep busy so her nerves wouldn't overwhelm her. At 9 o'clock sharp, Sophie flipped the sign on the door to open and unlocked it. Her heart pounded so hard she could almost hear it. Next to her, Lara and Liana nearly vibrated with excitement, while Thomas lingered in the background, a reassuring presence. And then nothing happened. The street continued its usual flow of traffic. People walked past, some pausing to glance curiously at the new shop, but no one came in. 10 minutes stretched into 30, then a full hour, with not a single customer. Maybe we should hand out samples on the sidewalk, Liana suggested, peering anxiously through the window. That always worked at the town square. Good idea, Thomas agreed. Let's prepare a tray. Sophie tried to hide her disappointment while she arranged small samples of various sweets. She knew new businesses were slow to start and required time to build clientele, but each minute without a sale felt like confirmation of her deepest fears, that she wasn't good enough, that she didn't deserve success, that she was doomed to fail. Lara and Liana went outside with trays of samples, greeting pedestrians with their matching smiles and contagious enthusiasm. Thomas accompanied them to oversee things, leaving Sophie alone with her thoughts. While wiping an already spotless counter, Sophie replayed the journey that had brought her here, fleeing her parents' home, the lonely pregnancy, abandonment, years of struggle, the chance encounter with Thomas, the tentative steps toward reconciliation. So much pain, so much effort to arrive at this moment, and what if it was all for nothing? The jingle of the door startled her. An elderly woman entered, surveying the shop with curiosity. "Good morning," Sophie greeted, feeling oddly shy in her own establishment. "Welcome to Sweet Moments." "Good morning, dear," the woman replied. "Your little ones offered me a caramel sample outside that reminded me of my childhood. I just had to see where it came from." Sophie smiled, feeling a flicker of hope. "Would you like to look at our menu? We have many other flavors." "Actually," said the woman, approaching the counter, "I'd like to sample one of each. I have a book club meeting this afternoon and something sweet would be perfect." A customer, just one, but it was a start. The rest of the day followed a similar pattern. Small groups trickled in, some drawn by samples, others by curiosity about the new shop. There were no lines or packed tables, but by closing time, Sophie had sold nearly half her sweets and received several genuine compliments. "That lady from the book club just called," Liana announced happily as they tidied up. "She said everyone loved the sweets and wants to place an order for their next meeting. And the man who owns the bookstore next door wants to discuss a possible partnership," Thomas added. "Something about offering mutual discounts to shared customers." Sophie nodded, exhausted but not entirely discouraged. It wasn't the grand opening she'd secretly hoped for, but it wasn't a total flop either. It was a beginning, a tentative first step towards something that could grow. Overall, I think it was a good day, she said, mostly to reassure herself. It was a great day, Thomas countered, loading the last dishes into the dishwasher. First day, first sale, first satisfied customer. Those are all important milestones. Sophie smiled at her brother, grateful for his perspective. Where she saw empty tables, he saw the customers who had come. Where she focused on the unsold sweets, he celebrated those that had pleased the buyers. The following days were similar. Few customers, modest sales, but a slow and steady growth. Everyone who tried Sophie's sweets seemed to return, often bringing friends or family. By the end of the first week, while the twins slept and Thomas and Sophie went over the numbers, the financials showed a neutral outcome. Not exactly profit, but no significant loss either. Just enough to keep going. It's not what we hoped, Thomas acknowledged, studying the figures. But it's not a disaster, Sophie added, and each day feels a bit better than the last. They sat at one of the bakery's small tables, cups of tea in front of them, the quiet of the night wrapping around the cozy space. For the first time in days, Sophie felt herself truly relax. You know, when we planned all this, I was mostly worried about money, she confessed. Whether we'd sell enough, if we could cover the bills, pay you back. That's natural, Thomas said, sipping his tea. But now I see something more important, Sophie continued, gesturing around the bakery. I'm building something of my own, something that doesn't rely on the Harrington name or our father's approval. Something that's entirely mine. Thomas regarded his sister for a moment, noticing a new steadiness in her voice, a quiet confidence emerging. I don't think our father will ever change, he said finally. I spent years hoping for that, a moment of regret, an admission of guilt, but I don't think it's coming. Probably not, Sophie agreed. His pride has always outweighed everything else. For a long time, that kept me trapped, Thomas went on, waiting for his approval that never really came, trying to be the perfect son to make up. He hesitated. To make up for you being gone. Sophie looked at him, surprised by his honesty. I never realized you felt that way. It's easier to admit now, Thomas said with a small smile. Seeing you move forward, build something new in spite of the past. It's inspiring, you know. Sophie shook her head, embarrassed. I'm just trying to survive like I always have. No, you're doing much more, Thomas insisted. You're thriving. You're showing your daughters the past doesn't have to define their future. You're showing me that too. A comfortable silence settled between them, each reflecting on the other's words. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we'd kept in touch, Sophie said quietly. If you'd looked for me or if I'd swallowed my pride and asked for help. We can't change the past, Thomas replied, but we're here now, right? Rebuilding. Sophie gazed out the bakery window at the quiet street, lit by street lamps. Yes, we're here now. And maybe that was enough. Not instant success, not a perfect family reconciliation, not a vanishing of old hurts. Just this moment, this new beginning, this tentative step forward. She looked back at her brother and smiled, a genuine smile without reservations. Thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. Thomas gently squeezed her hand on the table. That's what siblings do, and I hope we can keep doing it for a long time. The first step was taken. The road ahead was still uncertain, possibly full of obstacles, but Sophie no longer faced it alone, and that, she realized, made all the difference in the world. Saturday morning at Sweet Moments was busier than it had ever been. 3 months after opening, the little shop had built a loyal clientele, drawn in by both the exceptional treats and the welcoming atmosphere Sophie and her daughters created. Table 7 wants 2 more lemon meringues, Liana called, placing the order on the counter while adjusting the small apron she wore on weekends when she helped her mother. Sophie nodded, pulling a fresh batch of meringues from the oven. The sweet citrus aroma filled the kitchen, mixing with the other scents that made the space so inviting. We're almost out of chocolate tarts, Lara warned from the cash register. And it's only 11 o'clock. I have 3 more cooling, Sophie said. experiencing that familiar blend of exhaustion and satisfaction. The bakery's growing success meant more work, longer hours, more challenges, but also more independence, more pride, and more fulfillment. The door chime sounded, announcing another customer. Lara looked up to greet them, but the words died on her lips. Her expression changed so dramatically that Sophie immediately glanced toward the entrance, alarmed. A tall man with a commanding presence and completely grey hair stood in the doorway. He wore a dark, impeccably tailored suit and an expression of mixed determination and discomfort. Robert Harrington. Sophie felt as though the floor had vanished beneath her feet. In all the possible scenarios she'd imagined for this busy morning, her father walking into her bakery wasn't one of them. "Mom?" Liana asked, coming closer, her voice worried at the sudden pallor on Sophie's face. "It's fine, sweetheart," Sophie managed automatically, though nothing felt fine. "Could you please handle tables 7 and 9? I'll deal with this customer." Liana hesitated, eyeing the elegantly dressed stranger who had caused such a reaction in her mother, but she obeyed, carrying the sweets to the indicated tables. Sophie took a deep breath, wiped her hands on her apron, and walked over to the main counter. Her father remained by the door, as if waiting for permission to fully enter the shop. "May I help you?" she asked, her voice colder than she typically used with customers. Robert took a few steps forward, his eyes sweeping over the decor, the rustic tables, the softly hued walls, the simple yet elegant flower arrangements. Finally, his gaze rested on Sophie. "It's a nice place," he said, his voice grave and measured just as she remembered. "Thank you," she replied curtly. "We have a table for one, if you'd like." A flicker of pain crossed Robert's features, so brief Sophie almost missed it. Strange, she thought. Her father never let emotions show. "Please," he said, and there was something in his posture, an almost imperceptible hunch of the shoulders, an unusual hesitation, that caught Sophie off guard. She led him to a corner table, somewhat apart from other patrons. Robert sat down, placing his hands on the table as though unsure what to do with them. "Do you have a menu or—" he began, clearly uneasy. "It's posted on the wall," Sophie replied, keeping some distance. "But I can recommend the espresso and any fruit-based sweet. They're our specialties." Robert nodded. "A coffee, then, and whatever you think is best to go with it." Sophie turned to fetch the order, feeling oddly disconnected from reality. It was surreal. Her father, the man who'd disowned her, who'd declared her dead to the family, sitting in her bakery, ordering coffee like any other customer. When she returned with the coffee and a lemon meringue, deliberately choosing the sweet that most reminded her of childhood, she found Robert watching Lara and Liana closely as they served other customers. "They're yours, aren't they? He paused, as though the word was hard to say, "granddaughters." Sophie placed the items on the table more forcefully than intended. "Yes, the girls you refused to meet." Robert didn't respond immediately, keeping his eyes on the twins. "They look a lot like you did at their age." "The same eyes." "Those eyes came from Grandma Miller," Sophie corrected automatically. "You always said I'd inherited them from her." A sad smile touched Robert's lips. "Yes, I did." His gaze finally returned to Sophie. "You've done a good job with them. They're polite, considerate with customers. They seem—" he searched for the right word. "Happy?" "They are," Sophie affirmed, crossing her arms. "Despite everything, despite not having a father, grandparents, or the comforts they should have had." Robert lowered his gaze to the untouched coffee. "Thomas told me you turned down financial help, that you wanted to do it all on your own. So that's why you're here. Did Thomas send you?" "No," he said quickly. "Thomas doesn't know I came. No one does." Sophie studied her father, confused. The man before her seemed different from the intimidating patriarch she remembered. There was something broken in his posture, a vulnerability she never imagined he could possess. "Why are you here?" she finally asked more softly. Robert hesitated, turning the coffee cup slowly in his hands. I'm not entirely sure, he admitted. When Thomas told me about the bakery, I became curious. I wanted to see for myself. To see if I'd fail. No, he replied firmly. To see if you were all right, if you were happy. Sophie let out a short, disbelieving laugh. Now you care. After 12 years of calling me dead to the family. Robert finally tried the coffee, as if he needed a moment to gather his thoughts. I've made many mistakes, Sophie. The biggest was with you. Sophie felt a lump in her throat. Never in her life had she heard her father admit a mistake. It's too late, she said, fighting to maintain composure. I don't know if I can forgive you for what you did, for what you forced me to face alone. I understand, he said, surprising her again. Robert finally tasted the lemon meringue, and his expression shifted to surprise. This is extraordinary, just like the ones you used to make for your mother. I've learned a few things over the years, Sophie said, glancing toward her daughters, who were watching curiously from a distance. You always had talent, Robert commented. I remember how frustrated you'd get when you couldn't get a recipe just right. Always the perfectionist. The memory took Sophie by surprise, her father, usually so oblivious to domestic details, recalling something so specific about her. Robert opened his mouth to speak again, but suddenly his expression changed. A grimace of pain contorted his features, and his right hand flew to his chest. Dad? Sophie asked, alarmed. He tried to respond, but only a strangled sound emerged. His face went pale, sweat beading on his forehead. The cup fell from his hand, spilling coffee onto the table. Dad! Sophie rushed around the table, grabbing him by the shoulders as he doubled over in pain. Mom, what's happening? Liana asked, coming closer in alarm. Call 911, Sophie ordered. Right now. Lara, ever the practical one, was already on the phone, explaining the situation to the emergency operator. Other customers watched anxiously, some standing to offer help. Robert slid off the chair, and Sophie supported him as best she could, helping him lie down on the floor. Her father, once so strong and imposing, now looked frail and small. Hang on, she murmured, holding his hand. The ambulance is coming. You'll be okay. Robert's eyes met hers, filled with pain and something else, fear. The mighty Robert Harrington, who never showed weakness, looked at her in pure terror. Sophie, he managed to say, his voice barely audible. I'm sorry. So sorry. Don't talk, she pleaded, tears burning her eyes. Save your strength. His breathing was shallow and rapid. He gripped her hand with surprising force. Didn't want to lose you. Again, he murmured. Something inside Sophie cracked, a barrier she'd carefully built over the years. In the panic of seeing her father, the man who, despite everything, had been so pivotal in shaping her life, possibly dying before her eyes, words escaped her without filter. I forgive you, she whispered, tears flowing freely now. Now that you're back in my life, I don't want to lose you again. A faint smile curved Robert's lips before his eyes closed, and his grip slackened. Dad, Sophie cried, terror flooding her. Dad, no! Sirens wailed outside, and moments later, paramedics burst through the bakery doors. Sophie was gently pulled aside while they worked quickly, checking vital signs, applying oxygen, preparing him for transport. He's had a heart attack, one paramedic explained. We've stabilized him for now, but we need to get him to the hospital immediately. I'm going with you, Sophie said without hesitation. Mom. Lara's small, frightened voice brought Sophie back to the moment. Her daughters stood nearby, hands clasped, eyes wide with fear. Sweethearts, I need to go with... She faltered, not sure how to explain. With this man. He's your grandfather. The twins exchanged shocked looks. The grandfather we never got to meet, Liana asked bluntly. Yes, Sophie confirmed. I'll call your Uncle Thomas, and he'll come look after you, okay? We can look after the bakery, Lara offered, ever responsible. Just tell us what we need to do. Sophie looked at her daughters. So young, yet so strong and mature, she felt a surge of pride amid the panic. Mom, "We need to go now," a paramedic called, as his colleagues began moving the stretcher holding Robert. "Call your uncle," Sophie told them quickly. "Explain what happened, and close the bakery for today. I'll call as soon as I have news." Lara nodded solemnly, taking charge as she often did in difficult moments. Sophie gave her daughters a quick hug before following the paramedics to the ambulance. The hospital was a maze of white corridors and harsh lighting. Sophie sat in the waiting room, feeling oddly detached, as if watching everything happen from outside herself. "Sophie!" She looked up to see Thomas hurrying toward her, his face knotted with worry. "What happened? The girls called me, said Dad had a heart attack at the bakery." Sophie nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by exhaustion. "He showed up there this morning. I don't know why. We were talking lyrics and then—" She swallowed hard. "He just collapsed." Thomas sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Have the doctors said anything yet?" "They're still examining him," Sophie explained. "They said they'd update us once they have a complete diagnosis." They sat in silence for a few minutes, each absorbed in thought. "I never thought he'd actually go to the bakery," Thomas said finally. "He didn't mention anything yesterday when I saw him." "You see him regularly?" Sophie asked. "Every week, for business," Thomas replied, "but we rarely talk about personal issues, and certainly never about you." More silence. "What did he say when he arrived?" Thomas asked. Sophie tried to recall. It felt like days, not hours. "Not much. He complimented the place, asked about the girls, said he'd made many mistakes." Thomas turned to her, surprised. "He admitted to making mistakes?" "Yes," Sophie confirmed. "Said his biggest mistake was with me." Thomas looked genuinely shocked. "In all my life, I've never heard him admit he was wrong." Before they could continue, a middle-aged doctor approached. "Harrington family," they both stood instantly. "How is he?" Thomas asked. "Stable," said the doctor. "Mr. Harrington suffered an acute myocardial infarction, a heart attack. We intervened in time, and there doesn't appear to be significant permanent damage to the heart muscle. He's awake and responding well to treatment." Sophie's legs nearly gave out with relief. Thomas steadied her. "Will he fully recover?" Sophie asked. "With proper treatment and lifestyle changes? Yes," the doctor assured them. "But he'll need regular medication, a strict diet, moderate exercise, and most importantly, reduced stress. His condition was a ticking time bomb: high blood pressure, elevated cholesterol, chronic stress. Frankly, it's surprising this didn't happen sooner." Thomas and Sophie exchanged a look. Robert Harrington reducing stress. It sounded almost impossible. "Can we see him?" Sophie asked. "Yes, but only one at a time and only for brief visits," the doctor said. "He needs complete rest." Thomas gestured for Sophie to go first. "You go." "I think he'd want that." Sophie followed a nurse through the hallways to the intensive care unit. Her heart pounded as she neared the bed where her father lay. Robert looked smaller somehow, hooked to monitors, an oxygen mask covering part of his face. His eyes were closed, but they opened when Sophie approached. "Sophie," he murmured, voice weak but recognizable. "You came." "Of course I did," she said, pulling up a chair. "How are you feeling?" "Like an elephant sat on my chest," Robert tried to joke, though the pain was still clear on his face. Sophie didn't know what to say. There were so many questions, so many accusations, so many old wounds. But at that moment, seeing her father so vulnerable, they all seemed trivial. "The doctor said you'll be okay," she managed at last, "but you need to change some habits." Robert made a small, dismissive gesture with his hand, so characteristic it nearly made Sophie smile. "Doctors always exaggerate," he said, though without his usual arrogance. "Not this time," Sophie warned. "You almost died today in my bakery, in front of your granddaughters." The mention of the twins filled Robert's eyes with an emotion Sophie had never seen before. "They're extraordinary," he whispered. "So much like you were at their age. Reminded me of when you and Thomas used to run around the house, always plotting some mischief." Sophie felt her throat tighten. "They'd like to know you for real. not just as the man who collapsed in our shop. Robert closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them again, they glistened with tears. Another thing Sophie had never expected to see. "I'd like that," he admitted, "if you'll allow it." "We'll see how your recovery goes," Sophie replied, not wanting to commit entirely yet. "The doctor said you need to stay here for a few days." Robert nodded, looking tired. "You should rest now," Sophie suggested, standing up. "Sophie," he called as she neared the door. "Thank you." It was just one word, but it carried the weight of years of silence, of slammed doors, of unacknowledged pain. "You're welcome," Sophie said softly, feeling that something had fundamentally shifted between them. Not full forgiveness, not immediate reconciliation, but a beginning. And sometimes a beginning was all you needed. A week after being discharged from the hospital, Robert Harrington entered Sweet Moments with careful steps. He no longer wore his usual impeccable suit, but rather neatly pressed slacks and a cashmere sweater, a concession to the doctor's advice to dress comfortably. He still looked somewhat out of place in the warm, cozy environment, like fine crystal among rustic pottery. "Good morning," Sophie greeted, noting that he arrived exactly on time. Punctuality was always non-negotiable for Robert Harrington. "Good morning," he replied, glancing around. "Busy today?" "It usually is on Saturday mornings," Sophie explained, leading him to a reserved table in the corner. "Did you bring enough of your medications?" Robert gave a small smile, pulling a blister pack of pills from his pocket. "Following the medical instructions to the letter, I never imagined my schedule would revolve around pill times." It was strange to see her father like this, vulnerable, obeying others' orders, accepting his limitations. The man she remembered would never have admitted weakness. "The girls are in the kitchen helping with a new batch of meringues," she said. "They'll be glad to see you." She paused, still unsure how much trust to extend to this new version of her father. "We agreed on a short visit. The doctor says you need to avoid getting overtired." Robert nodded without protest, another surprising sign of change. "Understood. I just wanted to see how you're all doing." "Grandpa," Liana exclaimed, emerging from the kitchen with a bright smile, still wearing the small personalized apron Thomas had ordered for the twins. "You really came?" Lara trailed behind, more reserved but equally curious about the grandfather they'd only recently come to know. Sophie watched as the girls approached the table. Since his heart attack, they had visited Robert at the hospital twice. Brief, awkward meetings filled with hesitant questions and careful answers. "I brought something for you," Robert said, lifting two small, elegantly wrapped boxes from the briefcase he carried. The twins glanced at Sophie for permission. She nodded slightly as they opened the boxes. Inside each, identical just like the girls, was a delicate watch with a silver band and tiny blue stones marking the hours. "They're sapphires," Robert explained. "The birthstone for September, the month you two were born." The twins' eyes went wide at the obviously expensive gifts. "How did you know our birth month?" Lara asked, always straightforward. A sadness flickered across Robert's face. "I asked Thomas, he told me about you." "Thank you, they're beautiful," Liana said, already fastening the watch around her wrist. "I've never had anything like this." "It's not very practical for working in the bakery," Lara observed, though she admired the gift as well. "You can save them for special occasions," Robert suggested. "Or when you're older." Sophie experienced a swirl of emotions, unease at the expensive presents she feared were attempts to buy affection, mixed with genuine appreciation for the thought behind them, the twins' birth month and its corresponding gemstone. "Girls, could you check on the brownies in the oven?" she asked, wanting a moment alone with her father. "And see to tables 2 and 5, as please." Once the twins were gone, Sophie took a seat across from Robert. "You don't have to give them expensive gifts," she said quietly. "They're not used to that." Robert studied her for a moment. "I'm not trying to buy them, if that's what you think. I just wanted to make up for missed birthdays." 12 years of missed birthdays can't be fixed with fancy watches," Sophie replied more harshly than intended. To her surprise, Robert didn't bristle or defend himself, as he would have in the past. Instead, he nodded slowly. "You're right," he admitted. "It's just, I don't know how to do this, Sophie. So I don't know how to be a grandfather." The honesty in his admission left Sophie momentarily speechless. Her father, the great Robert Harrington, admitting ignorance about something. "No one knows how to be a grandfather at first," she said gently. "It's like being a parent. You learn by doing." "And I wasn't a good father," he said, regret coloring his voice. Sophie didn't deny it. They both knew it was true. "But you can be a good grandfather," she said finally, "if you really want to be." Robert lifted his eyes, a new determination gleaming there. "I want to try." Over the following weeks, to Sophie's astonishment, her father kept his word. Twice a week, precisely at 10 in the morning, Robert Harrington walked through the bakery door. At first, he would simply sit at his usual table, observing the flow of customers and occasionally chatting with the twins when they had a free moment. "I think I should try every sweet on the menu," he declared one morning, perusing the offerings, "so I can recommend them when people ask." Sophie lifted an eyebrow. "Who would ask you about my sweets?" "I have friends," he said, sounding slightly offended, "and business associates." The idea of Robert Harrington promoting her little bakery in high society circles was so unexpected, Sophie nearly laughed. But she didn't, recognizing the genuine effort behind his gesture. Gradually, his presence became part of the routine. The visits grew longer, and soon he began showing up not only on the designated mornings but also unexpectedly in the late afternoon to pick up the twins from school, on Sundays for a family lunch, or on a particularly busy Saturday when Sophie casually mentioned she could use some extra help. "What can I do to help?" he asked that Saturday, surprising Sophie by rolling up the sleeves of his expensive shirt. "You want to help?" she repeated, incredulous. Robert shrugged, a strangely youthful gesture at odds with his usual formal manner. "The doctor said moderate activity is good for me, and sitting here watching everyone else work seems improper." Sophie hesitated only a moment before handing him a clean cloth. "The tables need wiping when customers leave, and dishes need to be taken to the kitchen." And so, to the astonishment of everyone present, Robert Harrington, CEO of one of the region's largest companies, spent the afternoon cleaning tables and carrying dirty dishes. He didn't complain, didn't grimace, didn't show the slightest sign of finding the work beneath him. Thomas, who arrived midway through the afternoon, stopped in the doorway, eyes wide as he took in the scene. "Am I hallucinating, or is that our father carrying a stack of dirty plates?" he whispered to Sophie. "You're not hallucinating," Sophie confirmed, equally astonished. "He volunteered." "Of his own accord." "The heart attack must have been worse than the doctors thought," Thomas joked. "Clearly it affected his brain." Sophie gave him a gentle swat on the shoulder, but couldn't help smiling. It was surreal to see her father, a man who had likely never washed a dish in his life, working humbly in her bakery. Even more surprising was the twins' reaction. Initially wary around him, they warmed up as his visits became regular and as they saw him actively involved. "Grandpa, that's not how you wipe a table," Liana explained with the authority of her 10 years. "You have to move the cloth in circles and, see, otherwise it streaks." Instead of taking offense at being corrected, Robert listened attentively, copying his granddaughter's circular motions with the same earnestness he'd show in a business meeting. "Is this better?" he asked, following the pattern she demonstrated. "Much better," Liana said, flashing a radiant grin. "You learn fast for an old guy." Passing by an earshot, Sophie froze, expecting her father's fury at being called old. Instead, she heard something even more shocking. Robert Harrington laughed, a genuine laugh, free of sarcasm or disdain. "I suppose I am old," he agreed, amusement in his eyes, "but that means I have more experience. For example, I know exactly how to tickle cheeky little girls." Liana squealed in surprise and delight as her grandfather began tickling her sides, drawing curious yet charmed looks from the bakery's patrons. In the third week after leaving the hospital, Robert astonished everyone by arriving at the bakery with an elegantly folded apron draped over his arm. "I'd like to learn how to make those lemon meringues," he told a stunned Sophie. "If you wouldn't mind teaching me." "You want to cook?" she asked, struggling to imagine her father, who wouldn't even heat his own coffee before, taking an interest in baking. "I want to understand what you do," he corrected. "To better appreciate your talent." Sophie exchanged a glance with Thomas, who merely shrugged as if to say, "Why not?" "All right," she agreed, still uncertain. "But just know it's a delicate process. It requires patience." "Patience I have," Robert replied. "How else would I have built a business empire?" There it was, a flicker of the old Robert, arrogant and self-assured. But his tone was lighter now, making the boast less stinging. The impromptu baking lesson became a source of fascination for the twins, who observed with wide eyes as their always composed grandfather got covered in flour, struggling to whip egg whites to the perfect consistency. "Not so easy, is it?" Lara teased, surprising everyone with her playful tone. She usually kept a polite distance from her grandfather. "Nothing worth doing is easy," Robert said philosophically, glaring at the stubborn egg whites that refused to form stiff peaks. "Your mother always had the knack for this, even as a child." "Really?" Liana asked, eager for these small glimpses into her mother's childhood. "Oh yes," Robert confirmed, a gentle nostalgia softening his features. "When she was 7, she insisted on making a birthday cake for her mom. She turned the kitchen into a complete mess, to the housekeeper's horror, but the cake turned out surprisingly good." Sophie paused mid-stir, astonished. She barely remembered that incident, but the fact her father had apparently noticed such a small domestic moment, shook her. "Did you enjoy cooking even before I was born?" Lara asked her mother, newly curious. "Yes," Sophie answered softly. "It was the only place in the house where I felt free." A thoughtful silence settled over the little group, heavy with bittersweet memories. "Well, now you have your own kingdom," Robert observed, glancing around the bakery. "And you did it all by yourself." The simple sincerity of his acknowledgement touched Sophie more than any elaborate apology could have. The true test of their fragile reconciliation came when the twins' school announced its fall festival, a big event where parents, and ideally other family members, were invited to participate. "All the grandparents will be there," Liana said excitedly over dinner. "There'll be performances, games, food, and a cake competition," Lara added. "We thought the bakery could join. It's good publicity." "Of course we'll participate," Sophie agreed. "I'll think of something special." The twins exchanged a look, that silent communication only they understood. "We were thinking," Liana began hesitantly. "Maybe Grandpa could come too." Sophie tensed. It was one thing to let her father visit the bakery under her terms, another entirely to present him publicly as part of the family, deal with inevitable questions, and handle people's curiosity. "I'm not sure he'd be interested," she hedged. "Could we at least ask?" Liana pressed. "He mentioned never attending any of your or Uncle Thomas's school events," Lara added, to everyone's surprise. "Said he regretted missing those." Sophie felt a tightness in her chest. It was true, her father had never come to a single school event, always too busy with the business, leaving those trivialities to her mother. "You can ask," she finally allowed, "but don't be upset if he's busy." Much to Sophie's surprise, when the twins extended the invitation the next morning, Robert didn't just accept immediately. He reorganized his schedule to clear the entire day of the festival. "I cancelled 3 important meetings," he told Thomas later. "The board will have to cope without me." Thomas nearly choked on his coffee. "Are you cancelled board meetings to go to a school festival?" "It's not just a school festival," Robert corrected him solemnly. "It's the first family event I've ever been invited to. I'm not going to disappoint my granddaughters." And he didn't. On the day of the festival, Robert Harrington arrived precisely on time, dressed in casual but elegant clothes and armed with a high-end camera to document the occasion. "Do you actually know how to use that?" Sophie asked doubtfully. "I learned," he replied simply. Watched several tutorials. The mental image of her father, famously impatient with technology, calmly watching photography tutorials, was so surreal, Sophie couldn't hold back a smile. Throughout the day, Robert amazed everyone with his genuine enthusiasm. He cheered loudly at Liana's flute performance, congratulated Lara for her science poster that won an honorable mention, and even joined a grandparents' potato sack race, much to the twins' delight. "Your father seems different," observed the twins' teacher, approaching Sophie as they watched Robert being guided to a ring toss game by his granddaughters. "He is different," Sophie agreed, still marveling at the transformation. "The girls mentioned he only showed up recently," the teacher continued. "They said he was away. It's good to see them so happy, having the family together." Family together. The words echoed in Sophie's mind as she watched her father, brother and daughters interact with a warmth she never would have believed possible. Thomas joined her, following her gaze. "Who would have thought, huh?" he said quietly. Our father, the fearsome Robert Harrington, letting the twins balance rings on his head just to make them laugh. "It's surreal," Sophie agreed. "Sometimes I expect to wake up and find it was all a complicated dream." "It's not a dream," Thomas assured her, placing an arm around her shoulders. "It's real. Imperfect and still healing, but real." Sophie nodded, feeling a strange peace settle within her. This wasn't a perfect reconciliation. There were still awkward moments, painful memories, scars that would never fully fade. Yet there was also something new growing in those scars, understanding, acceptance, and genuine joy. "He can't change the past," Thomas said, seeming to read her thoughts, "but he's truly trying to be present now. I guess that's all we can ask," Sophie replied softly. In the months that followed, sweet moments thrived. The customer base grew enough to require hiring 2 additional employees. The finances stabilized, allowing Sophie to finally breathe without the constant fear of going under. One Sunday afternoon, with the bakery closed and the family gathered in Sophie's small apartment for lunch, Thomas surveyed the scene with quiet satisfaction. Their father, visibly healthier and thinner, listened attentively as Liana excitedly described a new school project. Lara was showing Sophie a drawing she made for a potential bakery poster. It was a family, imperfect, with wounds still healing, but a family nonetheless. "What are you thinking about?" Sophie asked, sitting next to him. "How it all started," he said, "with 2 honest little girls returning a lost wallet." Sophie smiled, recalling a day that felt so distant. Such a small act of honesty. "That changed everything," Thomas finished. "It brought us back together." "I suppose fate wanted to reunite us," Sophie mused, watching her daughters with their grandfather, who only months earlier had denied their very existence. "Or maybe some people simply deserve second chances," Thomas suggested. Sophie nodded, filled with deep gratitude for this new life, this fresh start. The pain of the past wasn't erased. Perhaps it never would be. But it had been transformed into something different, something that carried lessons and, unexpectedly, redemption. "Mom, Grandpa said he's taking us fishing on the next holiday," Liana called out, running over with shining eyes. "Can we go, please?" Sophie looked at her father, who awaited her answer with a hopeful expression she never thought she'd see on his once stony face. "Of course you can," she replied, smiling at her daughter, at her father, at this new reality they were all building together. "That sounds like a great idea." As Liana dashed back to share the news with her sister, Sophie felt a certainty settle in her heart. After so many years of struggle and solitude, she had finally found where she belonged. She had a place, a family, a true home. And that, more than any material success, was the greatest achievement of all.